Now, as we were saying in part one, as we continue, the very first thing that you must understand after reading Revelation chapter 6 and verse 6 is that the personal pronoun that you've heard or read in that passage that appears in Revelation chapter 6 and verse 6 and throughout the book of Revelation, in most cases and verses, is the servant, the faithful servant of Yahweh, whose name is in the original Hebrew or Hebraic tongue, spelled from right to left, Yud Wav Kef Nun Sophie, spelled in English translation as Yowchanan, pronounced Yochanan, Yochanan. That was translated into English as the infamous Christian's name known today as, quote, John, end of quote. That is, according to Revelation chapter 1 and verses 1, 2, and 3, which reads, as I quote, the way it's supposed to be read. The revelation of Yahweh ben Yahweh, the Christ, which Yahweh gave unto him to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it by his angel unto his servant Yochanan, or John as you know it, who bear record of the word of Yahweh and of the testimony of Yahweh ben Yahweh, and of all things that he, Yochanan, saw. Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand. End of quote. Now, this passage confirms that the personal pronoun I in chapter 6 and verse 1 is Yochanan, who was witnessing everything that he was being shown on a big screen by an angel of Yahweh, even while Yochanan was sitting in a spirit of Yahweh as a passenger thousands of years ago, a little over 1900 years ago, so to speak. One Bible reference of the so-called, quote, spirit, end of quote, is found in the book of Revelation chapter 21 and verse 10 for your confirmation and study purposes. Nevertheless, Revelation chapter 6 verse 6 also reads that Yochanan says, in part, quote, I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, end of quote, etc. Yochanan said he heard a voice too, along with the vision that he saw. Now the word heard, the English translation of the word heard, H-E-A-R-D, that is found printed here in this verse, came from the Greek word akuho, akuho, that has several meanings. A few of those meanings are, quote, to attend to, consider what is or has been said, to understand, perceive, the sense of what is said, to hear something, and to give ear to a teaching or a teacher, to comprehend, to understand, end of quote. Just to name a few. Also, with this, quote, heard, end of quote, Yochanan said it was a voice that he heard. That's a voice, one voice. And this certain, quote, voice, end of quote, of this one person was being heard in the midst of four beasts. Now, this word, quote, beasts, end of quote, is plural form in English. It's a noun, an English noun that represents, quote, four living beings, end of quote, of the anthropoid or humanoid or human-like species that came from the Greek's word zoon, spelled Z-O-O-O-N, zoon, Z-O-O-N. And these four living beings are also here today, listening to and reading this prophecy of Revelation as it is being spoken of, that we will also reveal, or that will be revealed to you during a later testimony. Meanwhile, right now, we want to say and stay on the focus of the voice that is said to be in the midst of the four beasts, who is now saying, quote, a measure of wheat for a penny and 3 measures of barley for a penny, end of quote. And is also commanding those very same four beasts, ordering them to, quote, see thou hurt not the oil and the wine, end of quote. Now, this voice that Yochanan is telling us today that he saw and heard on that big screen that the angel of Yahweh was showing and instructing him to write, quote, to attend to, consider what is or has been said, to understand and perceive the words being spoken that came from the word zone, also came from the original Hebraic word. It was created from, zone was created from the original Hebrew or Hebraic word that is spelled from right to left, Kof, Wav, Lamet, pronounced coal, spelled in English with a Q, O-W-L, or Q and owl, pronounced coal, that was later translated and then transliterated into another Greek word, the Greek word phone, spelled in English, transliteration as P, like Papa, H-O-N, like Nancy, E, like Edward. That's P-H-O-N-E, that we know in its English perception and pronunciation as phone, like telephone or cell phone. And both the Hebraic and the Greek's meaning of these words are, quote, a sound, a tone of inanimate things as musical instruments, or a voice of the sound of uttered words, like a speech of a language or of a certain tongue, end of quote. So therefore, or in other words, Yochanan is telling today's English readers of the book of Revelation, the King James Version, that when he witnessed, quote, the third seal, end of quote, being opened by Yahweh ben Yahweh, that was sealed in Revelation chapter 6 and verse 6, Yochanan, as a servant and witness of Yahweh, saw a vision of a particular man and heard his voice too. And not only that, but Yochanan was attentive to the voice and was also considering what was being said. However, the words that were being spoken by Yochanan or by the man that he saw on this big screen, had to be translated for Yochanan by the angel who was sitting there with him. Now you may be asking, why did this angel have to translate for Yochanan as they were both listening to the same man? Well, it's simple. Because the voice of this certain man was speaking in a tongue that is meant for a people that man would be speaking to of the future to understand when the third seal is opened. Remember? It doesn't take a lot of understanding just to understand that. We're speaking from one point of history to a future time of history, which is now. You mustn't forget that this was a prophecy that Yochanan was seeing on the big screen that was meant for today. You must not also forget that Yochanan spoke Hebrew. And because of that, Yochanan had to be told what was coming from the voice of this certain he in order for him to perceive the sense of what is said. This will also explain one of the many reasons why Yochanan wrote in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 3 these following words that are now printed in English as it reads, quote, "Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of his prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand," end of quote. Need you be reminded that when this was originally handwritten by Yochanan a little over 1900 years ago, time was not at hand at that time? Do you not agree? That passage was meant for now, for thereby every Hebrew Israelite in the land where this was first handwritten by Yochanan, understood Hebraic. The lack of understanding this estranged English tongue would also explain another reason why Daniel said, as we go back to the book of Daniel, chapter 12 and verse 8, that quotes, "And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" End of quote. That's Daniel chapter 12, verse 8. Why would Daniel say, "I heard, but understood not"? I mean, look at that again. Why would Daniel say, quote, "but I understood not," end of quote, in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 8? And when we go back to Daniel chapter 1 and verse 4, that reads that Daniel and his tribe of Israelites are, quote, "children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding science, and much as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach those who have such ability the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans, end of quote. Now that passage of Daniel chapter 1 and verse 4 proves that Daniel understood Hebrew and even the tongue of the Chaldeans. How is that? Because he taught it. That passage of Daniel chapter 1 and verse 4 also proves that since Daniel said in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 8, quote, I understood not, end of quote, then this would obviously mean that the voice of the tongue that Daniel heard was not of Hebrew or Chaldean. Just as Yohanan, when he wrote in Hebraic manuscript. So, when he wrote what is known today as the book of Revelation, and what was segmented to be chapter 6 and verse 6 by the English monarchs of Rome, King James I and his 47 biblicists, and the 7 Hebrew translators that he used of the King James Bible today. Daniel and Hebraic and Yohanan, they wrote the Hebraic word kole, K-O-L-E, in English translation, as he witnessed the third seal being opened. And decades later, the Greeks confirmed it by transliterating that Hebraic word kol to the Greek word phone, spelled P-H-O-N-E or F-O-N-A in Greek, that they admitted that Yochanan was in fact hearing something. Again, the Greeks admitted this by writing phone, that Yohanan was commanded by the angel of Yahweh to give ear to what he saw of a man sitting on a black horse teaching, or a teacher who is teaching a people that is being hidden under an allegory of 4 different descriptions. And with your reprobate mind, some of you who tried to interpret this, you actually thought that this was a black horse from the stables, from the horse track, from the fields. That's how your mind was closed to believe. When in fact one group of people that's being described in the book of Revelation chapter 6 and verse 6 are being described as one measure of wheat of the 4 different descriptions. And the other 3 groups of the same people are being described as 3 measures of barley. All who are also being described in allegory, they're also being described symbolically and in simile as being the color of bronze or brown in skin color, that were in physical slavery as the tail of all civilization in the same land where this certain he is seen sitting on this black horse teaching with his voice, as well as they who were in physical slavery was also emancipated by a U.S. president of that very same penny, allegorically. That is based on today's English understanding of that U.S. penny that beholds the tail that represents those brown people, the tail of civilization of this penny as being bronze or fine brass in color. That's on one side of that penny. And also beholds the 16th president of the United States of America as the head of that very same U.S. penny on the other side. Furthermore, the same voice is teaching them that they must comprehend this. That is, in order for them to understand the sound that's being made by a tone and results of an inanimate thing. Sort of like a tone that is heard as musical instruments, but instead it is a voice of the sound of uttered words in the form of a speech, an indite of a language that can only be understood of a certain tone, like the English tone.